Hi, St. Mark's. This week I'm going to begin a several-week series, most likely, on choral music from the English Reformation. And I'm starting today with one of my favorite composers from this time period. His name is Thomas Tallis. Part of Thomas Tallis's intrigue to me is that most of his biography is lost to history. As a commoner, not much is known about his early childhood. In fact, even the spelling of his last name is in question. Most often it is spelled Tallis, but in some sources it's also spelled Tallys or even Talles in some sources. Tallis was born likely sometime around 1505 in the English county of Kent. The first official documentation about Thomas Tallis comes from the Benedictine Priory of Dover in 1532, which lists him as the priory's organist. In 1537 and 1538, Tallis's name appears in the payroll records for the Church of St. Mary at Hill in London. He was likely the organist, but the records don't actually indicate what he was paid to do. In 1538, Tallis moved to Waltham Abbey, but in 1540, the abbey was dissolved by royal decree, as almost all monasteries, abbeys, and convents were in the whole realm of England. Tallis was paid 20 shillings in wages and 20 shillings as a, quote, reward. This equates to about $1,150 in today's currency. Tallis then became employed at Canterbury Cathedral in his home county of Kent. He was listed as a lay clerk, or clerk as we would say here in the US, or a paid singer. He was on the church's register in 1541 and 1542. Tallis's name disappears from the register in 1543. By this point, he was likely a gentleman of the Chapel Royal, a group of clergy and musicians who traveled wherever the monarch traveled to lead services in whatever church the sovereign chose to worship. Tallis's attachment to the royal court and also to the Cathedral of Canterbury indicates that he likely knew Archbishop of Canterbury during this time, Thomas Cranmer, who was the author of the first Book of Common Prayer and one of the foremost leaders of the English Reformation. After becoming a gentleman of the Chapel Royal, Tallis spent the rest of his life working for the royal household and served 4 Tudor monarchs, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. Tallis likely played the organ for services before 1570, but it is in that year that he was officially named organist of the Chapel Royal. I realize that many of you probably don't know the whole history of the English Reformation, and there are bookshelves upon bookshelves full of books on this topic. So let me give you a quick guide to the English Reformation. Here we go. Between 1532 and 1537, Henry VIII dissolves relations with the Bishop of Rome, Pope Clement VII. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy declared that the king was the, quote, only supreme head on earth of the Church of England, end quote. Further legislation made it a crime punishable by death to refuse to acknowledge the king as such. Henry's son with Jane Seymour, Edward VI, became king on Henry VIII's death at the age of 9. Since he was too young to govern, a regency council was appointed to run the country. Edward died in 1553 at the age of only 15. Though Edward VI never really ruled the country because of his age, several important things happened to the Church of England during his reign. First, the first Book of Common Prayer was published in 1549 and revised in 1552. Also, Cranmer's 42 articles were published and adopted as the basis for English church practices. They're called the Articles of Religion in our prayer book, if you'd like to look them up. Before Edward VI died in 1553, he left a will naming his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as heir to the throne, rather than either of his half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth. This was contested after his death, and Jane was deposed 9 days after taking the throne. Mary became queen instead. Queen Mary I was a staunch Catholic who attempted to undo all that her father, Henry VIII, and her brother Edward VI had done to promote Protestantism in England. Mary was the daughter of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Queen Mary imprisoned all of the leading Protestant clergymen, including Cranmer and many others. Queen Mary undid Edward's religious laws and first returned to the policies under her father, Henry VIII, then restored England to the Pope's jurisdiction, with the exception of the monasteries. These lucrative properties would remain the property of the crown. Mary I threw out the Book of Common Prayer and restored the Roman Catholic Mass. Many Protestants refused these changes and were executed during this time, including Hugh Latimer and Thomas Cranmer himself, leading to the nickname Bloody Mary. Around 800 other Protestants, who were mostly wealthy and able to afford to do so, left England, seeking refuge on the European continent. Queen Mary died in 1558 at the age of 42, likely due to some form of ovarian cancer. Upon Queen Mary's death, her half-sister Elizabeth became queen. Queen Elizabeth I reigned from 1558 to 1603, a good, long reign compared to her siblings, Edward and Mary. Elizabeth was the daughter of Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. One of her first acts as queen was to restore the Church of England and once again detach it from papal control. Within her first year on the throne, a new edition of the Book of Common Prayer was issued in 1559, 1 decade after the first edition came out. A new act of supremacy called Elizabeth supreme governor of the Church of England, rather than head like her father and her brother had been, because, according to some, it was not acceptable for a woman to have that title. Also, an act of uniformity required use of the 1559 revised Book of Common Prayer for all services in the realm. When Queen Elizabeth I died, she was buried, somewhat ironically, in the same tomb as her half-sister Queen Mary. And the tomb has a Latin phrase that translates to, "Consorts in realm and tomb, here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters, in hope of resurrection." Imagine what it would be like to be Thomas Tallis or any of the other clergy or musicians who served the royal household during this period. Depending on who was sitting on the throne, they could have been celebrating the Sarum Rite Catholic Mass or the service from the Book of Common Prayer. And it kind of went back and forth between the two throughout Tallis's life and career. The services may have been in Latin or in English or a mix of both. Tallis and the other composers of this age showed a sort of grit and flexibility that enabled him to compose music for whatever rite or ritual or religious proclivities were thrown at him by his employers. More about that in a minute. In 1557, Queen Mary was generous enough to grant to Tallis and to Richard Boyer a 21-year lease of the manor of Minster in Kent, along with a generous annual income of £91, 12 shillings per year, which translates to about $30,400 today. Now, it's important to realize this is just the income from the land. This is not including income that he might have received for performing in the Chapel Royal or for publishing his music. In 1575, Queen Elizabeth granted to Thomas Tallis and his student William Byrd, who you'll hear about in coming weeks, she granted them exclusive license to print and publish music as a means of generating extra income. Apparently, by this point in Tallis's life, his income wasn't quite as lucrative as it had been, and he needed some other way to support himself. Tallis married a woman named Joan around 1552, and nothing is really known about Joan or their relationship, and they seem to have been childless. Tallis was buried in Greenwich, England, in the chancel of the Church of St. Alphege. Now, as I mentioned before, Tallis lived during a tumultuous time in England, and he possessed a sort of flexibility or grit that allowed him to compose music both for the Sarum Mass in Latin and for the new Book of Common Prayer services in English. This was important because this flexibility allowed him to keep his benefactors, his employers, happy. And let's face it, the crowned heads of the Tudor dynasty are not people you really want to mess with, because if you do, you lose your head. As far as Tallis's musical works are concerned, a few instrumental pieces survive, but Tallis was mainly concerned with composing music for the church. He composed mostly motets, masses or services, and canticles for use at morning prayer or matins, or at evensong or vespers for a cappella choirs. I've compiled a YouTube playlist of several of Tallis's works from various parts of his career, including some well-known pieces. One Mass and his monumental piece called Spem in Alium. This is also known as the 40-part motet, since it is made up of 40 independent parts. So 40 singers, no one is singing the exact same notes as you are as a singer. And these singers are divided into 8 choirs of 5 voices in each choir. Spem in Alium is a beautiful work, and I hope you'll definitely listen to that one. But I hope you'll listen to all the pieces in the playlist, as there are some gorgeous pieces of music from Thomas Tallis. You can put them on play as you're doing chores around the house, or while you're driving in the car, or going for a walk for something different to listen to. The link to the playlist will be in the description box below. You may have to click the little caret or whatever you need to do on your device to open it up, but just click the link down there and have a listen. I hope to see all of you very soon.
Uh-oh, you're evaluating my work.
I am.
Are you subscribed?
I will with the red button.
And give us a thumbs up.
I'm a fan, of course.